331 BC. The dust of Gaugamela still settles as Alexander the Great stands at the head of 47,000 Macedonians who just broke the Persian Empire like a cheap vase. Sarissas gleam in formation, companion cavalry fidgets with reins, and somewhere in the baggage train engineers sharpen stakes for tomorrow's siege. But let's change one thing. Rolling onto that same blood-soaked plain is 68 tons of American steel that shouldn't exist for another 2,300 years. One M1 Abrams main battle tank. Fully fueled, fully loaded, crewed by 4 very confused tankers who just realized GPS doesn't work in ancient Mesopotamia. The Abrams carries 500 gallons of jet fuel, good for maybe 166 to 333 miles, depending on how hard the driver hammers it, burns 10 to 15 gallons per hour just sitting there breathing, and packs 55 main gun rounds split between armor-piercing sabot, high explosive, and somewhere between 4 and 12 M1028 canister rounds. Each one a shotgun shell the size of a trash can that vomits 1,100 tungsten pellets across 700 meters of kill zone. The math is simple and ugly. One canister into a packed phalanx erases 50 to 100 men in under 2 seconds. The coaxial machine gun holds thousands of 7.62 millimeter rounds. The armor is layered Chabum composite and depleted uranium that laughs at anything made before shaped charges were invented. The thermal sights can spot a human at 3 miles in total darkness. This is a 1,500 horsepower turbine-powered god of war dropped into the Bronze Age with a 48-hour human endurance limit and absolutely no way to call for gas. First contact happens at dawn. Macedonian scouts crest a hill and freeze because there's a metal beast the size of a small house idling in the valley. No horses, no oxen, just that turbine scream that sounds like a pissed-off dragon. Alexander's companion cavalry, the shock troops who shattered Darius at Issus, form wedge and charge because that's what Alexander's companions do. The tank's thermal sight paints them as bright white blobs against cold ground. At 1,200 meters, the gunner acquires. At 800 meters, he fires the first canister round. The formation simply ceases to exist. Horses tumble. Riders vanish into red mist. The survivors who weren't in the cone of death wheel and scatter, and Alexander just watched his best cavalry unit get deleted by invisible fire from a thing that moves faster than a galloping horse without breaking a sweat. Hypaspists advance next in tight order, Sarissas leveled, the elite infantry that held the line at Granicus. They eat another canister volley that turns 18-foot pikes into kindling and men into memories. Engineers trying to move siege engines get shredded by coaxial machine gun fire. Every engagement is the same story. Macedonians close, tungsten pellets or high explosive arrive first, Macedonians stop being a problem. By noon, the tank has burned through maybe 8 main gun rounds and a few hundred machine gun belts, killed somewhere between 400 and 800 men, depending on how tight the formations were, and caused absolute psychological chaos across an army that conquered half the known world but has never seen anything louder than a catapult. But Alexander didn't become Alexander by charging the same wall twice. He pulls back to 1,500 meters, well outside canister range, and watches. The tank moves fast on flat ground but slows on hills. It fires, pauses, fires again, mechanical rhythm, finite ammunition. 4 figures appear on top sometimes, humans, tired humans who need to eat and sleep. It doesn't resupply because there's nothing to resupply from. Alexander, who adapted tactics on the fly against Scythians, Persians, and Indians, starts doing math. The Macedonians have 47,000 bodies, the tank has 55 rounds, and maybe 40 hours of fuel. He doesn't need to win the battle. He just needs to not lose until the tank runs out of war. Macedonian combat engineers, the same lunatics who built siege ramps at Tyre and bridged rivers in monsoons, start digging. Anti-tank ditches 2,300 years before tanks are supposed to exist. 10 feet deep, 20 feet wide, camouflaged with brush. They fell trees across roads. They channel the tank toward marshy ground where 68 tons of steel sinks like a stone. They build fascines and abatis, force multipliers that turn open terrain into a maze where the Abrams can't bring that 120-millimeter gun to bear. Light infantry, javelineers, and slingers shadow the tank at 1,000 meters, not attacking, just present, forcing the crew to stay alert, burning mental stamina and diesel. The Macedonians spread formations thin, refuse to give the canister rounds dense targets, turn every engagement into a war of attrition where the tank bleeds ammunition into empty air. By hour 36, the crew is running on stimulants and spite. The driver's hands shake. The gunner's eyes burn from staring at thermal screens. They've fired 40 rounds, killed maybe 1,500 Macedonians, but there are still 45,500 out there, and the fuel gauge is flirting with empty. The commander makes the call. Find defensible ground, dig in, make them come to us. They park hull down behind a ridge, turret exposed, and wait. Alexander sends catapults forward, not to penetrate armor, that's impossible, but to throw rocks and flaming pitch at the optics. Thermal sights don't work great when coated in burning tar. Smoke from grass fires drifts across the battlefield. The tank's godlike sensor advantage degrades to squinting through a dirty windshield. Rain starts falling, cold autumn rain that turns dust to mud and thermal images to grainy static. 60 hours in, the Abrams is out of main gun ammunition, down to machine gun belts and fumes. The crew is hallucinating from exhaustion. 4 men in an overheated cabin listening to 47,000 murmurs outside in the darkness. Macedonian engineers have dug approach trenches to within 50 meters. At night, infiltration teams crawl forward with ropes and levers, not trying to crack the armor but to jam obstacles into the tracks, pour mud over vision blocks, wedge boulders under the hull to prevent movement. The tank fires its last machine gun, bursts into shadows. Torches and smoke corrupt the thermals. Engineers work in shifts, patient, methodical, the kind of siege warfare Alexander perfected at Gaza and Tyre. They don't need to kill the beast. They just need to wait for it to stop breathing. The final assault never comes as a glorious charge. The tank becomes a steel tomb, immobilized in mud with blinded optics and empty magazines. The crew, professional to the end, surrenders when the last machine gun belt runs dry and there's nothing left but hand tools against 47,000 increasingly confident Macedonians with all the time in the world. Alexander's engineers eventually pry open hatches using leverage and patience. The crew emerges to an army that doesn't understand what they just fought, but knows they survived it. Could one M1 Abrams tank beat Alexander the Great's entire army? For about 48 hours, absolutely. The tank wins every firefight, causes catastrophic casualties, and introduces the concept of combined arms warfare 2,000 years early. But wars aren't decided by armor thickness. They're decided by logistics, endurance, and whether your enemy is stupid enough to keep feeding you targets. Alexander wasn't stupid. He was Alexander. The Abrams becomes a legend told around Macedonian campfires, the metal demon that breathed fire and died when it couldn't eat. Alexander becomes Alexander. The crew becomes very confused prisoners of war trying to explain jet turbines to people who think lightning comes from Zeus. What do you think? Could modern tactics have changed the outcome, or does patience always beat technology? Drop your theories below and subscribe because next week we're dropping a Roman legion into Normandy and things get even weirder.